The United States still looks like the most powerful country on Earth. Its GDP is the largest. Its military budget dwarfs everyone else's. Its companies dominate global technology, finance, and defense. And yet, here is the uncomfortable truth Washington does not want to confront. America can no longer build its own future without Canada's permission. The engines of modern power electric vehicles, renewable energy, semiconductors, satellites, missiles, fighter jets, do not run on dollars or slogans. They run on critical minerals, and the United States does not control them. Canada does. This is not a story about tariffs, insults, or political theater. This is a story about inputs versus outputs, about who controls the raw materials that make power possible, and who is discovering too late that military spending and market size mean very little when your supply chains are exposed. The crown of North American power is not being seized. It is being passed quietly, structurally, and irreversibly. For decades, the United States equated power with scale. Bigger economy, bigger military, bigger market. That logic worked in the 20th century when industrial inputs were abundant and geopolitics revolved around oil and manufacturing capacity. That world is gone. According to U.S. government data, Washington now classifies 50 minerals as critical to economic security and national defense. Of those, the United States is 100% import dependent on 12 and more than 50% dependent on imports for another 29. This is not a marginal vulnerability, it is systemic. At the same time, American domestic mining projects face long permitting timelines, legal challenges, political opposition, and fragmented federal-state authority. The average time to bring a new U.S. mine from discovery to production is nearly 3 decades longer than most political careers, and longer than most strategic plans survive. So while Washington talks about reshoring, resilience, and industrial policy, it remains structurally dependent on external suppliers for the very materials that underpin its ambitions. And this is where the illusion collapses. Because when you examine who actually possesses those materials, the answer is not China alone. It is Canada. Canada is not a single resource economy. It is something far more strategically dangerous. It is a country that sits atop virtually the entire critical mineral spectrum required for 21st century power. Lithium for batteries, nickel and cobalt for electric vehicles, rare earth elements for wind turbines, precision-guided munitions, and advanced electronics, gallium for radar, satellites, and missile defense, niobium for jet engines, superconductors, and hypersonic weapons, uranium for nuclear energy and deterrence, potash for global food security, aluminum, copper, tungsten, palladium, the list does not end. Unlike many mineral-rich states, Canada combines 3 decisive advantages: political stability, strong environmental and legal oversight, existing integration into advanced industrial supply chains. This combination is rare, and it is precisely why Canadian minerals command premium interest from Europe and Asia. Perhaps the most important development is happening in a place most Americans have never heard of: Ontario's Ring of Fire. This vast region in northern Canada contains enormous deposits of nickel, chromite, copper, platinum, and other strategic minerals. For years, development moved slowly due to infrastructure challenges and Indigenous consultations. That changed the moment Ottawa realized something fundamental. Control over minerals is control over leverage. Canada is no longer asking how quickly it can export raw ore. It is asking who deserves access and under what terms. Nowhere is this power shift clearer than in defense. Take gallium. China dominates global supply. When Beijing restricted exports, the United States discovered it had exactly one viable alternative supplier in North America: Canada. Take rare earth elements. An F-35 fighter jet contains roughly 920 pounds of them. China controls most global processing. Canada holds major reserves and is building domestic processing capacity, something the United States largely lacks. Take niobium. Add a small amount to steel, and strength increases by more than 30% while weight drops. It is essential for jet engines, rockets, and hypersonic systems. Canada is the second largest producer in the world. Take uranium. Canada's reserves are roughly 10 times larger than America's, and Canadian companies already refine materials used in U.S. energy and defense supply chains. This is why the irony is so severe. While American political rhetoric threatens Canada with tariffs, coercion, or even annexation talk, the U.S. Department of Defense has quietly invested tens of millions of dollars in Canadian mining projects. Not out of generosity, but necessity. The Pentagon understands what politicians pretend not to see. There is no credible American defense supply chain without Canada, and that is precisely why the balance of power is shifting. Canada does not need to challenge the United States. It only needs to control access, and that control is now being exercised with calculation, patience, and partners who treat sovereignty as non-negotiable. American power has always relied on a simple assumption: proximity equals dependence. Canada is next door. Canada sells to the U.S. Canada has no alternative. That assumption is catastrophically wrong. When Washington escalated its rhetoric threats of tariffs, coercive trade measures, even casual annexation talk, it believed it was applying pressure. In reality, it was triggering a strategic awakening in Ottawa. Canada did not respond emotionally. It responded structurally. In August 2025, Canada tightened foreign investment rules for critical minerals, explicitly placing them under national security review. Shortly afterward, Ottawa ordered divestment by foreign state-linked investors in Canadian mineral assets. The message was unambiguous. Access is conditional, not automatic. At the same time, Canada accelerated permitting discussions, infrastructure planning, and intergovernmental coordination around key projects. The Ring of Fire was no longer treated as a long-term aspiration. It became a strategic priority. Meanwhile, American strategy moved in the opposite direction. Washington began scrambling for alternative suppliers, negotiating mineral deals with war-zone Ukraine and conflict-ridden Congo countries with fragile institutions, security risks, and ethical complications. The contrast could not be sharper. A stable democratic partner with integrated supply chains was alienated. Unstable, high-risk states were embraced. This was not leverage. It was self-inflicted strategic damage. What makes this moment irreversible is not politics. It is contracts, capital, and infrastructure. Critical mineral projects take decades. Once supply is committed through long-term agreements, it does not snap back when leadership changes. A 5- or 10-year lithium contract with a European or Asian buyer is not canceled because Washington's tone improves. Canada understands this. That is why it is no longer content exporting raw ore. Processing capacity is being built inside Canada. Rare earth separation, nickel and cobalt refining, battery-grade materials. Every processing facility reduces dependence on foreign intermediaries and captures more value domestically. Every downstream investment tightens Canada's grip on the supply chain. At the same time, European and Asian partners are moving quickly. The European Union, desperate to reduce reliance on Chinese minerals, sees Canada as a rare combination of scale, stability, and trust. Asian economies, Japan, South Korea, Southeast Asia, are willing to pay premiums for Canadian supply precisely because it comes without geopolitical chaos. This is the critical point Washington missed. Canada does not need to cut the United States off. It only needs to reduce marginal access over time. Each redirected shipment, each non-American processing plant, each long-term contract signed outside U.S. supply chains. These are not negotiating tactics, they are permanent reallocations of power. Empires rarely fall in dramatic moments. They decline through structural shifts that only become obvious in hindsight. This is one of those moments. The United States still has immense strengths: innovation, capital markets, military reach, but it no longer controls the foundations those strengths rest on. Its economy is increasingly dependent on materials it cannot reliably secure on its own terms. Canada, by contrast, does not need to announce anything. It does not need to posture. It does not need to threaten. It simply controls the storehouse. Gallium for radar, niobium for jet engines, rare earths for F-35 seconds, lithium for electric vehicles. uranium for energy security, potash for food systems. All of it sits in Canadian ground, governed by Canadian law, directed by Canadian interests. And while Washington argues, threatens, and improvises, Canada signs contracts, builds capacity, and chooses partners who understand that power today is not about domination, but reliability. This is why the crown is passing, not in a single election, not in a single crisis, but through a quiet, methodical reordering of who controls what the future runs on. The storehouse is full. The terms of entry have changed, and the empire that once assumed access is now discovering it must ask too late.